We now live in a culture where you're a genius for simply stating the obvious. Maybe that's because political correctness has made stating the obvious too costly. Well, one person who's not afraid to state the obvious is Tucker Carlson, as he did in Melbourne on Monday night when talking about Australia's housing crisis.
Well, one of the reasons it's happening is a principle we call supply and demand. And when there's a greater demand for something than there is a supply, the price rises. And that is purely a matter of population. If you have more people than you have houses, guess what happens to housing prices? They rise. This is the most obvious principle in nature and real estate. So why is it happening? Immigration. There's only one reason. That's the reason. And nobody wants to say that because it sounds like an attack on immigrants.
Did you notice the applause from the crowd when he said the reason for the housing crisis is immigration? They weren't clapping for or against immigrants, Liz. They were simply clapping a man who dares to say what everyone knows but is too scared of saying for fear of being labelled a racist.
It's a very simple numbers game, but try telling that to the Albanese government. We're still getting 10,000 immigrants every week. That's 1,500 immigrants every single day. That's 60 immigrants every single hour. Where are we supposed to put them? We know Build Skills, the very task force that the Albanese put in place to address the housing crisis, told them just a couple of months ago, this whole plan that you have to build 1.2 million houses over the next 5 years, we're 90,000 construction workers short. OK, and that plan kicked in this month. We're supposed to see 20,000 homes built in Australia starting this month in, month out for the next 5 years. Who believes that's going to happen? And as Tucker went on to say, if you are the government, this is your number one, well, definitely one of them. Yeah. It's up there with national security and all the rest of it. This should be one of your number one priorities. Because if people's kids or grandkids, rather, can't afford a house in their 20s or in their 30s, that's it. That's the end of your line. That's the end of, and that is why we see such low birth rates. It's not because people don't want children, it's because they feel like they can't afford them. You speak to the average person in their 30s, they're not thinking of having kids. They can barely afford the rent, much less dream of having a home. If they can afford a home, they're much more likely to marry up and have kids.
And as I've talked about many times, it's if you want people to be a part of your society and you want them to feel like there is something worth conserving and looking after, they need to have a family and or a home, right? Home ownership is the key to being part of the world, because if you don't have something of your own, what is there left to preserve? The world is set up against me because you have a small number of people with a lot of money who are allowed to own all of the property, therefore I don't have to look after what's here. And so they look for other causes to get involved with, which these days is environmentalism. They're not worried about what's staring them in the face, about the community that they live in. They're worried about the rest of the world, the macro, I suppose, as opposed to the micro, because it's of no concern to them. I don't own my house, doesn't matter. I'm just going to be a servant to my landlord for the rest of my life. So why should I care about my community and my suburb and my neighbours, etc.? I'm going to worry about the rest of the world because what is in front of me doesn't matter. And it is basic, as he says, economics, supply and demand. And we end up in this sort of Ponzi scheme situation where you said, Liz, you know, we are 90,000 construction workers short. So we go, oh, shit, we need to bring in all of these people from overseas to build the houses for us. So we bring them in to build the houses, but there aren't the houses for them to already live in. So you actually exacerbate the problem while trying to fix the problem.
But it's worse than that, because these tradies they bring in, because we need tradies to build houses, are all being siphoned off to the renewable energy dream
and
put to work there.
And then
we get more people and still no tradies.
When we got the list recently of the jobs that the federal government will prioritise for skilled migrants, it had a whole bunch of tradies that weren't on the list, but it did have yogis, yoga instructors, and martial arts instructors, right? That is the ridiculous situation we have found ourselves in. We know that more people means more demand on houses. It's pretty damn simple.
There's so many simple things that the government could be doing, like caps on international students, which they're talking about now. The unis are screaming their heads off because we all know for every single university, their biggest single source of income, other than federal funding, thanks taxpayer, but we'll take the internationals over your Aussie kids any day of the week, is the money coming from international students. And I looked up the number of international students in our country as of February this year, 713,145. That is astronomical. It's an all-time high, and that is over 713,000 people with roofs over their head in our country that could and should be going to Aussies. I mean, the whole university thing is another thing in and of itself, but I am so sick of Aussies missing out on placements that they deserve because they'll take an international student over you any day. Your grades are just as good, but international students are paying up to 4 times more and they pay up front. So the universities just go, stuff off you Aussies. We know that we're funded mostly by the Australian taxpayer, but no, we'd rather take international students over you. But that is just one example of the many-faceted problem that government could be attacking from every single angle if, as Tucker says, your number one priority are households for the future and for the next generation of Aussies and the next generation after that. Clearly, our government doesn't care.
And we have to worry about what we're doing with our kids as well, right? Because you want a house to live in for the future, but you also need a job for the future. And oh my God, what a great idea. We could have Australian kids building houses, and we know that there are a dearth of apprentices. They're desperate. The building industry is desperate for apprentices right now, and they simply can't get them because we shoehorn all the kids off to university to go and do an arts degree, a BA, a bugger all, and they come out the other side and they can't get themselves a job. Or we churn out all these law students who then can't find themselves a job. And we have kids who are at uni, who are not academically apt and shouldn't be there. They should be doing an apprenticeship and going out to build the houses, but we don't encourage them to do it because we think that is somehow, second-grade work that we can fill with migrant workers. Well, I can tell you that the average apprentice in 5 years' time, after they've completed their apprenticeship, will be earning more money than someone who's come straight out of university after 5 years.
And will have no HECS debt to pay off either.
Are you saying a degree in gender studies is not going to get you far in life?
What a strange concept, James.
We're talking about supply and demand, and it's not just that there's a gap between the two, but the gap is growing. There's an interesting article in The Australian the other day talking about how we had 547,000 immigrants in 2023, which coincided with an 11-year low in the number of homes being built. So it's not just that there's a gap, the gap is widening. So there's no relief in sight, and the government need to do something fast about it.
Indeed.